Hi everybody, and shalom from Israel. I hope everyone had an enlightening Chanukah, a joyous celebration. After all, we deserve it. And for all of our friends out there listening who are celebrating Christmas, wishing all a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone, and soon enough also a Happy New Year coming up, 2026, the secular New Year. Hoping, praying that better days are certainly ahead, and that we all actualize, that we manifest these better days, because we can't just sit around and be optimistic, imagining that someone else is going to usher in these better days, but it's really on us to take action and throw those anchors forward, pull ourselves towards a better future. So welcome back to Anchors of Hope. This is episode 7. The subject title, if you will, is The Mask We Wear. The mask we wear. And I want to start with a quote that stopped me in my tracks, caused me to slow down and think when I had first encountered it. And the quote goes like this: "We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be." Kurt Vonnegut wrote that, and it raises a question that echoes through centuries of Jewish thought and Jewish experience. What happens when the mask we wear becomes who we are? This week's Torah portion, VaYigash, in the book of Bereshit in Genesis, gives us one of the most powerful examples of such a dilemma. Joseph, son of Jacob, Joseph the dreamer, the favored son, who is risen to become essentially the second most powerful man in Egypt. But to get there, he had taken on or was given an Egyptian name, Egyptian dress, Egyptian identity. He had to take on the Egyptian culture, and soon enough, he became, in the words of our text, as if he was a Pharaoh, Pharaoh. And then, of course, there comes a moment in this Torah portion, or last week's Torah portion, I should say, when his brothers arrive. His brothers come from famine, from the land of Canaan. They are sent by their father Jacob to go and check out the situation down in Egypt. So I want us to sit with this scene for just a moment. Joseph's brothers come before him. They are desperate for food during the famine. They bow down just as Joseph's childhood dreams predicted they would. But they don't recognize him. How could they? This isn't the 17-year-old boy they threw into a pit, the boy they sold into slavery and then lied about, telling their father that he was torn apart, eaten by some savage animal. This is actually an Egyptian official now, speaking through an interpreter, wielding absolute power over their fate. The text tells us that Joseph recognized them immediately. Well, of course he did. They were his brothers, right? But here's the critical question. In that moment of recognition, what else was Joseph recognizing? And more importantly, who was he at that moment? Vonnegut's warning becomes visceral here. Joseph had spent years pretending to be Egyptian. The pretense wasn't trivial. It was survival. It was success. It was power. He had become what he pretended to be, or needed to pretend to be. The Egyptian identity wasn't just a costume anymore. It was woven into the fabric of his daily existence. That struggle of who he was, who he needed to be, who he wanted to be. But VaYigash in this Torah portion, the very portion's very name means, and he drew near, he came closer. It shows us that what happens when two identities collide. Judah steps forward, Judah the brother of Joseph, and tells the story of the father's grief, their father Jacob's grief, of Benjamin's danger, of a family torn apart as a result of the other brother who was torn to shreds, namely Joseph. And suddenly, Joseph can't hold the pretense anymore. The text tells us, quote, Joseph could not restrain himself. He sends all the Egyptians away and reveals himself to his brothers. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? He says. In Hebrew, those words, Ani Yosef, ring like a bell throughout the centuries. He doesn't say, I am Tzafnat Pa'aneach in his Egyptian name. He doesn't say, I am the revealer of dreams of Egypt. He says, I am Joseph. This is the moment where we see the cost of assimilation, but we also see its limits. Joseph had power, he had position, he had security and influence, but he couldn't sustain the pretense in the face of his family's genuine crisis. The mask cracked, and underneath was still the Hebrew boy who remembered his father's love. Now he could read this as a simple morality tale. We can consider this as something to learn from. An example: be yourself, don't assimilate. But I think the story is far more nuanced and far more relevant to the questions we face today. Joseph's Egyptian identity wasn't entirely false. He really did have administrative genius. He really could navigate complex political systems. He really did save Egypt and ultimately his own family through that expertise. The skills were real. The contribution was indeed genuine. What was false was the idea that he could fully become Egyptian, that he could completely sever his connection to family, to his people, to his story. The moment his brothers appeared, all the carefully constructed Egyptian identity couldn't hide who he truly was. This raises urgent questions for us as contemporary Jews in the moments of crisis, during war, and most recently after October 7th, when many Jews who had spent years downplaying their own Jewish identity, who had become comfortable in spaces where Judaism was private or incidental, suddenly found themselves confronting that identity in new ways. Some discovered they couldn't maintain the pretense when their people were under attack, namely here in Israel or with Jew hatred rising around the world. Others perhaps doubled down on assimilation, hoping it would provide safety. But here's what Joseph's story teaches. The question isn't whether to engage with the broader world. Joseph certainly did that brilliantly. The question isn't whether we maintain connection to our core identity while we do so. Can we be sophisticated global citizens without forgetting we're children of Abraham, that we are members of Am Yisrael, one family? Can we hold positions of influence without pretending we're something we're not? Because Vonnegut's warning cuts both ways. We become what we pretend to be, and if we pretend we're not Jewish, we risk losing that identity entirely. Not in one generation, but gradually, imperceptibility, until one day we realize we've forgotten who we are. This is where our Anchor of Hope framework becomes essential, because Joseph's story shows us that identity isn't just about feeling or belief. It's about what keeps us grounded when the storms rise, when the skies turn gray, when darkness comes upon us. Think about the three anchors: Jewish peoplehood, Zionism, and the state of Israel. These aren't abstract concepts. They're concrete connections that prevent Joseph from floating away entirely into Egyptian identity. First, peoplehood. When Judah says "our father," Joseph can't maintain the pretense. Family, the most basic unit of peoplehood, pulls him back to his true self. We need those connections. We need to know we're part of an extended family that spans continents and centuries. We pretend we're not part of that family. We lose access to its strength, to its resource, to the anchor of our existence. Second, Zionism, the longing for return, the refusal to accept exile as permanent. Joseph had physical power in Egypt, but he never forgot where he came from. Eventually, he makes his brothers promise to carry his bones back to the land he came from when that time comes. That's Zionism in its most elemental form. The insistence that our story is rooted in a specific place, a specific land, belonging to a specific people. And third, Israel, not just as geography, but as the lived reality of Jewish sovereignty and self-determination. Joseph couldn't create that in his generation, but his insistence on maintaining identity, even though he was engulfed in Egyptian culture and identity, kept that possibility alive for future generations. The Exodus story doesn't happen if Joseph completely assimilates. His choice to remain Joseph, even while functioning as an Egyptian, preserved the thread that would lead eventually to Exodus, to Sinai, to Revelation, and to the return to the homeland. These anchors aren't restrictive. They are liberating. Joseph's greatest contributions came because he remained, was reminded, reconnected to his core identity. He brought Hebrew wisdom to Egyptian administration. He saved both peoples, but he could only do that because he didn't lose himself entirely in the process. So what does this mean to us, practically speaking? It means that we need to be thoughtful about what and who we pretend to be. If we pretend Judaism is incidental to who we are, it will become incidental. If we pretend Israel is just another country we have opinions about, rather than our people's anchor, we lose something essential to our identity. If we pretend our connection to Jewish peoplehood is merely cultural flavoring, rather than fundamental identity, we risk waking up one day and discovering we've become what we pretended to be. But it also means that we don't have to choose between authentically Jewish and being fully engaged with the world. Joseph shows us this third way. Bring your full self, including your Jewish identity, into every space you occupy. Let that identity inform your work, your relationships, your contributions to society. The Anchors of Hope framework reminds us that authenticity isn't about isolation. It's about maintaining connection to our people, to our history, to our land, to our future, while we navigate complex modern realities. VaYigash ends with Joseph and his father reunited, with the family intact in Egypt, but not assimilated into Egypt. They remain distinct, connected, identifiable. That's the model. Be Joseph. Engage brilliantly with the world. But when the moment comes, and it will come, have the courage to say, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. This is who I am. I want to thank you all for listening once again to this episode of Anchors of Hope. And always remember, Am Yisrael Chai, it's not just a slogan, it's a way of life. Until next time, stay anchored. Bye everyone. Love and light from Israel.